Meep.
Okay, so I went to the theater yesterday and I saw Beau Is Afraid. Where do I even begin? The spoiler-free, too long, didn't ask version of this entire video is that I really enjoyed the film. In fact, I loved it. I thought it was visually stunning, expertly directed. It features a powerhouse performance from Joaquin Phoenix. And as a total uncompromised package, I found it reinvigorating, daring, and inventive. And I'm going to boldly predict right now that it's probably going to be my favorite Ari Aster movie ever, period. But I also think that as a film, in the way that we've traditionally come to know and understand them, this is probably the worst movie he has made so far, and I'm not surprised at all that it's getting middling reviews, and I will be absolutely floored if it manages to make a profit. Boiling things down like this, it's just, like, what does that even mean if I don't continue to explain myself? But the good news is that I will continue to explain myself if you keep watching, but before I do that, I do need to say there will be light spoilers for Beau Is Afraid from here on out. This isn't really a movie you can actually spoil, in my opinion, but I will be spoiling Hereditary and Midsommar for sure, because if I'm going to talk about Beau Is Afraid, I need to address the elephant in the room. The proverbial elephant, of course, being the video I made 2 years ago called Hereditary and Midsommar Are Fatally Flawed, a video that I still mostly stand by to this day. You know, it was never really meant to be an academic review of the films, it was just my feelings on those films at that time. I'd do that video very differently today, but there's two things I personally disliked about Hereditary and Midsommar that I need to bring up again, because they've definitely played into my thoughts on Beau Is Afraid. Personal gripe number one was that they were both derivative. They're obviously their own films, but they were also obviously both other films as well. They both really struggled to ride the line between homage and copying, and it was kind of distracting for me. Beau Is Afraid does not pose the same issue. If I were forced to compare Beau Is Afraid to anything, I'd say it's like The Odyssey meets The Truman Show meets Synecdoche, New York meets Mother meets Under the Silver Lake. That is to say, it is unlike anything I've ever seen before. If ever in my life I could call a film truly original, now would be the time to do so. It's also just flatly the most Ari Aster thing that's ever been Ari Aster. It's got all of his tropes. It's got head trauma, family trauma, especially involving the mother, themes of mental illness, panic attacks, especially ones that are drug-induced, sexual assault. The worst case scenario always happens. And I also just want to note that Ari Aster very clearly has a phobia of an attic from an old house of his or something, or it's only happened twice, but something's going on there. Ari Aster is to all those things I just listed what Tarantino is to women's feet, or perhaps more aptly, what Scorsese is to gangsters and Christianity. No wonder Scorsese loves Aster so much, but of course, the film being the most Ari Aster thing ever, does lead me to personal gripe number two, which is text versus subtext. Text obviously meaning what's literally happening in the story, and subtext meaning what the story is really about underneath it all. Ari Aster's previous theatrical films really struggle to balance these two out in a way that has ever fully satisfied me. In fact, the only time he ever really managed to do it for me was Strange Thing About the Johnsons. Hereditary was doing great until the ending, when I felt that the film went full-on textual, like the literal demonic story felt like it overrode what was going on subtextually in a way that undercut the emotional impact of the film. Midsommar started out as a literal story about a traumatized woman in a doomed relationship, but quickly fell fully into subtext. The characters stopped being people and instead became one-dimensional concepts in a giant metaphor for codependency, played out in a series of minute and repetitive interactions, barreling toward a conclusion that felt inevitable from the beginning. But ironically, what I called its fatal flaw for a lot of people was the film's greatest strength. The lack of characterization and simplicity of the story left a ton of room for the audience to project themselves onto the film, to fill in the textual gaps with their own experiences, read into subtle details, and develop an unrivaled attachment to the film, which is why I think a lot of people thought that I just didn't get it, for whatever reasoning they felt, regardless of how illogical or baseless and untrue. What I wanted to see from Ari Aster going forward because of those films was a perfect marriage of text and subtext where the story worked literally, but had a ton to say between the lines. But now the tables have kind of turned on me, and I'm sort of putting my foot in my mouth because I loved Beau Is Afraid, and it is most certainly not the perfect marriage of text and subtext. There's this old film school phrase that gets thrown around that's like, the beginning of a film teaches you how to watch it. And Beau Is Afraid, from the first minute it was on screen, said, F text entirely. This is only subtext. There is no literal story. There's zero attachment to reality. It's just a bunch of surrealist, fantastical things that happen. And you take away from them what you can. You're really only meant to project yourself onto them. And somehow I managed to meet the film where it was at and miraculously followed it the whole way through. I don't really feel like getting too revealing or personal in this review or whatever it is, but I'm sort of forced to because as someone who suffers from panic disorder with OCD tendencies and also has a lot of baggage involving my upbringing, let's say, this film hit me with the force of a semi-truck going 1,000 miles an hour directly into my face. Due to a combination of physical health conditions involving my stomach and the constant panic attacks and myriad of other mental unwellness that comes with all that, I hadn't been to the movie theater in almost exactly a year. Even after all my physical symptoms got addressed, because of all the awful experiences that I had, my anxiety just drew this mental line between being at a movie theater and being incredibly unsafe. So every time I'd even think about going, I'd start to panic. So I just stopped going. Like, was I really gonna go out of my way to have a panic attack in the middle of the Mario movie? No, I wasn't. No movie felt worth that. That was until Beau Is Afraid, and from the first moments of the film, it felt like it looked me directly into the eye and said, I know how you feel, which did make me feel safe and comfortable. It was a huge sigh of relief. But then the film would take me to places I haven't fully processed yet that I wasn't ready to go to. It was triggering memories I didn't want to think about and displaying how those memories feel in such a gut-wrenchingly real and provocative way. Like, it was a lot, to say the least. The film is anxiety incarnate. Like, every terrible thing my anxiety has ever made me feel could possibly happen actually happened in this movie. One of the people I saw it with a few hours after seeing it asked me, why does the movie make more sense in retrospect? And without even thinking, I very quickly replied, because trauma always does. This movie is traumatic. It only ever deals in extremes. It either made me feel wildly disturbed or made me laugh hysterically. I either felt blissfully comforted or profoundly uncomfortable, to the point where it got so metatextual that my head felt like it was just spinning like a Beyblade or something. And when I walked out of the theater, I felt so simultaneously confused and reassured. And I still feel that way right now. It is going to be impossible for me to really break down the extent of how I feel about Beau Is Afraid until I get a chance to rewatch it and then deliberate on it for years to come, just as I've done with Ari Aster's other films. So don't take this as my definitive take. It's clearly more of like a ramble, immediate reaction type thing. But all I can really say for certain right now is that I loved it. I was elated by it. But I don't want to be a hypocrite here. I think that if you are unable to project yourself onto the film in the way that I clearly was able to, if you don't have a ton of experience with someone like Beau, you're not likely to get a ton out of the film. It is a seemingly formless string of visual metaphors. It is like an album visualizer for crippling anxiety and mommy issues. Structure? What structure? Pacing? What's that? Nuanced characterization of the protagonist? Who needs it? And this is what I meant when I said that this may be his worst film yet in the traditional sense. It is unconventional to the point that it really only works in hyper specificity. It is unmarketable and it is unrelenting in that. For 3 straight hours, it never gives up on being obtuse and assaultive to its audience. It is Ari Aster's complete and total self-indulgence. So if you walk away thinking it was pretentious or unwatchable, I don't agree, but I also would never try to correct you. But for me, I walked out of that theater feeling validated, but also challenged. I walked away with so many thoughts and feelings that I do not care to share in this video. I was spoken to and shown things in such a way that made the entire experience feel unreal. Like there was no way I could be seeing this movie. I must be dreaming, right? You know, there's no way A24 gave Ari Aster $35 million to create this. This can't be real, which was so utterly refreshing in a world of market-safe franchise filmmaking. I love everything this film represents, both as a metaphor and as a theatrical release. It really does feel like a statement. How do I end this? I don't want to say if you didn't like it, you don't get it, because I've loathed that phrase being lobbed at me for the past couple of years. I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence. So what I'll say is this: if you didn't like it, then it wasn't made for you, plain and simple. This film is only going to work for very specific people in very specific places and times in their lives and their processing of their own experiences, with very specific mindsets about what films can or should be. And I say all that fully aware of the fact that's why it worked so well for me. I am that specific person. Does that make it a good movie? Not necessarily, but I also plainly don't care. I loved it. But you probably want to know, like, should you go watch it? Yeah, I'd say it's absolutely worth giving a chance for sure. Give it a try, but don't be surprised if you walk away without much to feel or say about it. In fact, I think if you find this film incredibly unrelatable, you should probably walk away feeling very thankful. For right now, today, at this moment in time, that's all I can say about how Beau Is Afraid made me feel. Hopefully I'll get around to making an actual well thought out and in-depth video on this film at some point, rather than whatever this was. Please go support the film in theaters if you're able. Go support my Patreon. Segues. I'm gonna go attempt to process whatever the hell just happened.